Okay, so I have a kind of provocative idea to start this deep dive, and I'm going to warn you, it sounds a little bit sci-fi, maybe even a little dystopian, but just, stay with me here.
Okay, I'm ready.
What if I told you that when we speak to each other, like right now, or when you're ordering a coffee, we aren't just exchanging information. We think we're just, trading facts or telling stories. But what if we're actually running, like, executable code on each other's nervous systems?
It does sound like science fiction.
Right.
It sounds like something straight out of the Matrix. But if you look at the research we pulled together for this deep dive, that metaphor is surprisingly literal. We're looking at a whole stack of documents here, from behavioral handbooks to linguistic analyses, and they all point to this one kind of unsettling conclusion. Language isn't a single-layer thing.
Right. And I have to be honest, when I first read that phrase, executable code, in the notes, I kind of rolled my eyes a little. It just sounded like some tech bro term for talking. But then I started digging into this idea of layered communication, and, well, I'm not rolling my eyes anymore. I'm actually a little paranoid.
Good. Paranoia is the first step toward awareness.
Oh, that's comforting. Okay, so let's unpack this. The sources describe every conversation having a surface dialogue layer, which is just the plot, the literal words, the stuff we'd write down in a transcript, and then there's this hidden structural or operational layer.
Exactly. Think of the surface layer as like the user interface on your phone. It's the icons, the text, the things you see and touch. But the structural layer, that's the operating system running in the background. That's where the actual work is happening. It's where power and intimacy and boundaries are all being negotiated in real time.
And the mission for this deep dive is to give you, our listener, what the sources are calling structural fluency. We want to move you from just hearing the words, the narrative, to actually seeing the architecture of the interaction.
Because once you see it, you realize that a lot of what we call connection or charisma, it's not magic. It's actually a form of geometric positioning.
Geometric positioning. That sounds so clinical. But as I was reading the examples, I realized I've been programmed by conversations my whole life without even knowing the code was running.
We all have. We respond to it reflexively.
So, okay, let's get into that mechanism. The sources talk about relational positioning. What are we actually looking for here? Because this isn't just reading between the lines, is it? Like trying to figure out if someone's secretly mad at you?
No, and that's a really crucial distinction to make. Reading between the lines implies you're looking for a hidden secret or some subtext like an emotion they're hiding. What we're talking about here is a mechanical layer of interaction. It's not about feelings. It's about executable commands.
Wow.
The sources call it executable relational positioning.
Okay, give me a concrete example. Because executable is a strong word for just, chatting.
It is, but it fits. When you speak, you aren't just conveying meaning. You're transmitting signals that trigger these reflexive responses in the other person about ownership, permission, time. Let's start with what they call time grants.
Time grants. Okay.
Think about a situation where you're running late, or maybe you're fumbling with your papers in a meeting, and the person across from you says, "No rush, take your time."
That's just being polite, right? It's a nice thing to say.
On the surface, yes, it's a polite instruction. But structurally, look at the geometry of that. It's a grant of bandwidth. They are signaling, I own this resource time, and I am benevolent enough to permit you to draw from it.
Oh, wow. So by telling me to take my time, they're subtly establishing that the time was theirs to give in the first place.
Precisely. It establishes a hierarchy of resources. If I can grant you time, I am technically in the power position, even if I'm being nice about it.
That is so subtle and so effective. What about identity references? The sources mention pronouns as these little anchors.
This is a huge one in corporate settings, or even in relationships. If a problem comes up and I say, we need to handle this, versus you need to handle this.
You need to handle this just feels like an accusation.
It feels like an accusation because of the geometry. I'm separating myself from the issue and pushing it over into your territory. But even we can be tricky. If a boss says, we need to work harder, but they really mean you need to work harder.
Right.
They're using we to create a false structural alignment.
They're hijacking the we to distribute the load without saying it.
Exactly. And the fascinating part is people respond to this reflexively. They don't sit there and think, oh, he's using a plural pronoun to diffuse responsibility. They just feel the weight land on their shoulders.
Or they feel the warmth of being included.
Right. And this brings us to one of the most important concepts in this whole stack, resonance.
Hmm.
The sources say that when two people share the structural layer, it creates this deep intimacy. But, and here's the part that I think explains so much social anxiety, there's a catch.
Of course there's a catch.
The catch is that intimacy automatically creates boundaries. The sources call this exclusionary intimacy.
This was the part that really clicked for me, especially with group dynamics. We have all been in this situation. You're at a party, standing in a circle with two other people. You're all technically in the same conversation. But the other two, they just seem to be locked in a totally separate world.
Let's really paint this picture because this is the key group example from the sources, and it's devastatingly accurate. So you have two people operating inside that shared structural layer. Now, are they being rude to you?
No, that's the worst part. They're not turning their backs on me. They're not whispering. They might even be looking right at me and smiling.
Exactly. They're politely talking around you. But if you watch the mechanism, they're reinforcing their alignment with each other. They're using shared resonance, specific timing, maybe a cadence that catches a laugh just a split second faster than you can process.
Yes. It's like they're passing a ball back and forth, and I'm standing there with my hands up, but the ball just,
Whizzes right past your
it whizzes past my ear every single time.
That's it. By operating in that shared operational layer, they are actively leaving you outside the relational loop.
So the exclusion isn't something they are doing to me actively. It's just a byproduct of the connection they have with each other.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That is the key insight here. It's not about the tools themselves being divisive. It's that inclusion and exclusion emerge from the shared resonance itself.
Oh.
You feel that distance, not because of what's being said. The surface words might be perfectly inclusive, but because you cannot access the geometry being shared between them.
It's like they're on a private Wi-Fi network that doesn't show you its password. I can see the router, I know the signal's there, but I just can't join.
And that feeling of isolation is so profound because it's structural, not just social. You aren't just left out. You are, in a way, dimensionally separated from the interaction.
Okay, well, that explains so many awkward cocktail parties in my life. But if this is a code or a structure, how do we learn it? We don't take a class in this, right? Because the sources seem to say we start learning this way, way earlier than I thought.
We do. We start learning it before we can even really speak.
Uh-huh.
And this brings us to the concept of manners.
Oh, manners. I usually think of manners as just, don't chew with your mouth open, say please, don't be a jerk. But the sources claim manners are actually source code training.
It completely recontextualizes everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The source argues that manners are not about being nice. They are a linguistic control architecture and an onboarding protocol.
Onboarding protocol. That makes raising a toddler sound like installing new software.
In a way, it is. You're installing the operational grammar of language. So think about it. We teach kids to say please and thank you long before they understand the abstract concepts of gratitude or debt. Why do we do that?
I always just assumed it was to make them pleasant to be around so other adults don't hate them.
That's the surface benefit for sure. But structurally, manners serve three really specific purposes. The first is signal standardization.
Okay, explain that.
Well, you need predictable markers to reduce ambiguity. If a child wants a cookie, they can scream, they can grab, they can cry. That's super high ambiguity. But if they learn to say please, that is a standardized request marker. It signals to the parent, I am now initiating a formal request transaction.
Got it. So it just cleans up the noise in the signal.
Exactly. The second one is role encoding. This is huge. Manners teach children to track relational geometry. Who has the authority? Whose turn is it to speak? When we tell a kid, don't interrupt, we aren't just teaching patience. We are teaching them that they are a node in a network, and that network has traffic rules.
So it's teaching them to map the room, to realize they aren't the main character in every single scene.
Correct. And the third, and I think this is the most critical one for adult success, is channel discipline.
Channel discipline.
Manners constrain impulse. You have to wait your turn. You have to frame your request in a certain way. This builds the capacity for what they call high bandwidth interaction later in life. If you can't control your impulse to speak, if you can't inhibit your immediate reaction, you can't participate in complex, layered communication.
So manners are basically the training wheels that install the software for structural fluency. And if you skip the training wheels, you just crash when you try to ride the bike of complex social interaction.
Or you just never learn to ride at all. You stay stuck on the surface, wondering why people don't seem to listen to you, or why you can't get what you want, even though you keep asking for it.
Which is a perfect transition to the next section. Who actually hears this stuff? Because the sources are pretty clear. Not everyone has the same perceptual bandwidth. And I have a feeling a lot of us are walking around deaf to this frequency.
Yeah, this is one of those provocative parts of the research. The sources categorize listeners into 3 archetypes based on how much of this architecture they can perceive.
Let's walk through them. First up, we have the fool. Now, before anyone gets offended, the sources are really clear. This isn't about being stupid, right?
Not at all. You could be a genius, have a PhD, and still be a fool in this specific structural context. The fool is a functional role, and it's defined by a perceptual limitation. The fool processes language only at the semantic surface. They hear the literal narrative. If you say, I'm fine, they believe you're fine. End of story.
So they're just blind to that executable layer we were talking about.
Completely. And that creates what the source calls a systemic vulnerability. The fool is governed by language they believe they're governing. They comply with boundaries they didn't even see being established. It's compliance without confrontation.
That's terrifying. It's like you're playing checkers and you don't realize the other person is playing 4D chess. You lose before you even know the game started.
It's worse. You don't realize there is a chessboard. You just think you're having a nice chat while the other person is rearranging the furniture of your reality.
Okay, moving up the ladder, we have the wanderer. And I have a feeling this is where a lot of us live.
I think most people spend most of their lives here.
Yeah.
The wanderer has expanded their bandwidth a little bit. They start noticing cracks in the narrative. They detect pattern irregularities, tone shifts, things that don't quite fit the literal words.
So this is where you get that gut feeling that something is off.
Yes, they're in a state of interpretive instability. Think about when you walk away from a conversation, you're just like, why do I feel weird about that compliment? Or why do I feel like I just agreed to organize the holiday party when I went in there to quit my job?
Yes, that lingering anxiety, that what just happened feeling.
That anxiety is the friction of the structural layer. The wanderer feels the geometry shifting. They can feel the walls closing in, but they lack the tools to see it or to stop it. They know the game is rigged, but they don't know the rules.
They can hear the hum of the machine, but they don't know how to operate the controls. That sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting. It's a state of constant, low-grade social hypervigilance.
And then we have the final stage, the magician.
The magician. And it sounds mystical, but in this context, it's highly technical. The magician has achieved structural fluency. They treat language as a functional art.
So they're not just participating in the conversation, they're literally architecting it.
Exactly. The source mentions they can close the causal distance.
What does that even mean?
It means they can close the gap between a word and a result. When a magician speaks, they use words as operators to execute state changes in other people. They can shift the energy of a room, establish intimacy, or create distance, all while having a perfectly normal surface conversation. They aren't guessing. They are executing code.
Okay, I want to be a magician. Or at the very least, I want to stop being a fool. So let's get practical.
Yeah.
The listener is probably wondering, what does this code actually sound like in my daily life?
Let's look at some functional translations. These are great for spotting the difference between what is said and what is being executed.
Hit me.
Okay, we talked about this one earlier, but let's re-examine it with our new vocabulary. The phrase, no rush, take your time.
Surface layer. I am a nice, patient person.
Structural execution. I am granting you access to my bandwidth. You are permitted to draw from my resources. It's a benevolent power move that cements the magician's status as the resource holder.
Right. Okay. What about, I appreciate that. I say that all the time.
Usually when someone does you a favor.
Yeah.
The execution is, I see your investment. I may return support when our positions reverse. It's an acknowledgement of a transactional debt in the structural layer. It's like making an entry in a ledger.
So thank you is emotion, but I appreciate that is accounting.
Very often, yes. And here's a common one. You're welcome anytime.
Sounds like basic hospitality.
The execution is, we share access. You are welcome into my space as I am into yours. It's a reciprocity protocol. If I let you in, I expect to be let in. If a magician says this to you, they are opening a door, but they're also handing you a key to your door for them to use later.
It really changes how you hear these casual pleasantries. You start to realize everything is a negotiation.
Everything. Even, and I would say perhaps especially romance.
Yes. The sources brought up flirtation, and they didn't frame it as romance at all. They framed it as exploratory calibration, which is the least sexy way to describe flirting I have ever heard.
Laughs. It's not very romantic, but it is accurate. Flirtation is the ultimate test of interpretive bandwidth. It's designed specifically to provide plausible deniability. You say one thing on the surface, but you're probing for alignment on that structural layer.
The bartender example was the one that stuck out to me because it explains why flirting is so confusing.
Right. So imagine you're at a bar with a friend. You're speaking to your friend. That's the surface layer. You're talking about work, the weather, whatever. But you are modulating your cadence, your volume, maybe the angle of your shoulders, specifically to signal the bartender.
So the surface conversation is with my friend, but the structural signal, the ping, is actually routed to the bartender.
Exactly. You're probing for attention and alignment from the bartender without ever screaming, "Hey, look at me." It tests whether the bartender is tuned in to that hidden frequency.
And here's the genius part. If the bartender ignores you.
You haven't technically been rejected. You were just talking to your friend. You never asked the bartender for anything on the surface layer. Your ego stays completely safe.
Plausible deniability. It protects the ego from the sting of rejection.
It manages risk. It's multi-channel signaling. You're broadcasting on two frequencies at once. If they pick up the hidden one, great, you connect. If they don't, you just stay on the public frequency and no harm is done.
That makes so much sense. It's a safety mechanism.
It's highly sophisticated code.
So we've covered the mechanics, the archetypes, the translations, but I want to zoom out for the last few minutes. What does this all mean for us? Because we can't just walk around analyzing every syllable everyone says. We go crazy.
No, you can't overanalyze everything. But the goal here is agency. This is the philosophy of agency section of the deep dive.
Agency.
True power in any interaction doesn't come from having a big vocabulary. It doesn't come from being the loudest person in the room. It comes from perceiving the architecture.
It's a difference between walking through a building and being the architect who designed it.
Or at least seeing the blueprint. If you're a fool, you're walking through walls you don't see and tripping over furniture you didn't know was there. If you're a wanderer, you see the furniture, but you don't know how to move it.
And the magician moves the furniture.
The magician designs the room. The shift we want you, the listener, to make is from being a passive observer of a narrative, just following the plot, to becoming an active architect of your own relational reality.
And when you get two people who can do this, two magicians, what happens then? Does it just become a battle?
Sometimes. But ideally, it becomes flow. The sources say it reduces causal distance. Because both people are fluent in the structure, they don't need to explain everything. The surface layer doesn't have to do all the heavy lifting. They can move fast. They can synchronize at a super high bandwidth.
It feels like telepathy.
It feels like telepathy, but it's really just high-speed structural alignment.
Yeah.
They're running the same compatible code.
So we've moved from seeing conversation as a simple trade of facts to seeing it as this complex geometric interplay of power, intimacy, and boundaries.
That's the journey. And I think the challenge for you, the listener, is to now diagnose your own interactions.
Yeah. Look at your last three conversations. Were you the fool? Did you miss the subtext until it was way too late? Were you the wanderer, feeling that weird shift in the air, that tightness in your chest, but not knowing what it meant?
Or were you the magician? Were you the one setting the tempo?
And don't be hard on yourself. I think I'm probably the fool about 60% of the time.
We all are. The goal isn't perfection, it's just awareness. Once you know this layer exists, you can't unsee it.
Before we go, I want to leave everyone with one final thought from the sources that it really blew my mind. It's about dimensional architectures, and this is where we get a little philosophical.
This is the heavy hitter, the thought that keeps you up at night.
The idea is this: if communication happens on layers that some people can perceive and others can't, are we even inhabiting the same reality?
It's a profound question. If I'm speaking to you using structural operators, grants, permissions, resonance, that you cannot hear, and you're responding only to my surface narrative, we're technically in the same room. We're hearing the same sound waves, but we're operating within overlapping but non-identical interpretive worlds.
We're walking through different dimensions of the same conversation. I'm playing checkers, you're playing 4D chess, and we both think we're playing the same game.
Which means the reality of an interaction, the truth of what happened, depends entirely on your capacity to perceive it.
That is something to sit with. Next time you're talking to someone, ask yourself, are we in the same world right now?
Or am I just a tourist in yours?
Thanks for diving deep with us. Keep listening to the structure, not just the words.
See you in the architecture.